Welcome to An Author's Journey, where a prominent author chats with us about their journey as a writer. I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Today's featured guest is Dana Goodier. Dana Goodier is someone who writes, but not necessarily as a full-time author for publication. Rather, Dana is an edupreneur, a podcast host, and a school leader with 21 years of experience in education. She initially spent most of her career teaching world languages and English. She completed her doctoral degree in educational leadership in early 2020. Inspired by her own work as a teacher, she dedicates much of her time to providing her fellow educators with professional development sessions featuring techniques to minimize off-task behavior and to increase time on task. She is also the host of the podcast for educators, Out of the Trenches, which features, in her words, those who have been in the trenches and have managed to crawl out. You can follow Dana on Twitter at Dana Goodier and visit her website at danagoodier.com. Let me take this opportunity, Dana Goodier, to welcome you to An Author's Journey.
Well, thank you so much for having me on today.
We appreciate you coming here and chatting with us. Let's get right to the questions. What do you wish your podcast listening audience knew about you?
Well, there's a lot of things I wish they knew. Probably just the journey leading up to launching the podcast and, just kind of the wanting to, talk about stories of resilience. I think every educator has that time where they've been in the trenches, right? And that's the theme that I went and ran with. So I really want listeners of my podcast to know that although you've been in the trenches at some point, your learning throughout the journey helps make you better. And even people who've been through like the crappiest of trench stories are able to pull themselves out and learn from them. And for some, the trench story can be something that they're like being in, right? They like doing the hard work. And I've also learned about the similarities I've had with a lot of guests, just somebody I recorded with the other day who likes, to work in those high poverty schools and the Title I schools and just learning a lot about how helping families and providing resources to families. So I think something that the listeners don't know about me so much is that similarity I share, with these educators I interview a lot of the time. And I go into the pre-chat usually not knowing much, right? I might look at their podcast or look at their Twitter handle, but, we really hit it off and, find out a lot about each other through that podcast recording process. So I'm glad I took the step and started the podcast a little over a year ago.
Was there something that was an event maybe that said to you, I've got to do this podcast. I'm not going to write a book or I'm not going to write a poem. I'm going to do a podcast. Was there one event that maybe just triggered that?
Well, I thought about starting a podcast in the fall of 2019 because I've been working with Danny Bauer, who's the host of Better Leaders, Better Schools podcast. And he's had some resources on his website if you wanted to start podcasting, what microphone you should get, and those type of things. And I really didn't launch it and think more about really launching it until May of 2020. And I wouldn't say there was a specific event. It was maybe just that time that we had, as it had been a couple months after everything shut down, and that time of reflection. And I was participating in a lot of professional development, a lot of it through Corwin, the authors that were putting on book clubs and things like that. And I just thought it was a good time to launch. And, I had the first couple of guests were just local connections that I have. And I think for me, that auditory medium is probably easier. I do blog, which we'll talk about later, but having that interview with a guest and just hearing their story is a great way to put something out. And podcasts are so popular now. I mean, there's been a lot just in the educational field that have been launched since mine as well.
Now, you mentioned that you blog, and I'm sure that's one of the types of writing that you're doing. But when you were writing for your doctoral studies, That's a unique type of writing,
Yeah.
writing for an educational leadership doctorate. So is this a 180-degree difference doing a podcast, or are there some similarities there as well?
Well, the doctoral studies I did were all online. So if I compare my doctorate program to the principal licensure program I did, which was through the University of Colorado, the principal licensure program I did was more hybrid. There are a few online classes, but mostly in person. And the online doctorate program, like we don't even talk to the people. You're just putting discussion question answers in the chat. I got the contact information of a few fellow students, but really it's all, and then I would talk to my advisor of the dissertation itself on the phone. So, but there were never like video conferencing. It was all very much just email and the course room communications writing. And so, I think maybe I missed that. I would say that human connection, right? That conversation piece, right? Because at the time I was, working in a school, and there were no fellow colleagues who were in a doctorate program. Since there is a former colleague from that school who has started a doctorate program, maybe inspired by what I did, but so really, I think if you're in the similar situations, people, it's always good to have those conversations. And so a lot of the people I've had on the podcast have had, recent, actually somebody I just talked to today had completed his in August of last year, and somebody else had completed hers in September of last year. And so having that similarity of going through that process. And, I had an advisor that you talk to when you're having, issues with like the approvals process and all that. So I would say when it comes to like venting and getting support, it was probably only the advisor I got that from, because you don't have that face-to-face communication. I mean, we're doing everything now, like podcast and my podcast and all the meetings that I do with these different masterminds I'm in are doing through Zoom, but at least, you're having an interpersonal communication because you're hearing their voice and you're seeing them, even though it is through Zoom. But that online doctorate was just totally written, and very much just that written piece, and not that interpersonal piece. So yeah, I think the blogging that I do now, obviously the writing is totally different, right? Because you're writing to a different audience. You don't want to, I do insert some quotes in websites sometimes, but you're not like you're worried about like all the academic language and all that. But I think it's a lot closer to, what you're communicating with people when you're sending an email, or just when you're writing a newsletter, or those type of things. It's the blogging writing is not hard, right? You have to make sure there is a flow, and there's certain things that the SEO on the WordPress website looks for, but it's not like you're trying to fulfill the criteria of the doctorate level writing process at a university.
Now, that writing is totally different than those who write fiction, whether it's prose or poetry. And I'm wondering, do you ever feel that you're harboring the great American novel or short story inside of you, and you're anxiously waiting to release it to the world? Or do you even consider that as a priority?
I don't think I really have a novel inside of me per se. I mean, there are people that come out with novels later in life. So, I'm not going to say never. I probably have a story or two to share in a book form that would come out, hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years, that would be more educational related. If I can just sit down and put something together and write a manuscript and send it off to some publishers. That would be more just that like how to, right, for educators to benefit from. But a novel, writing about a story about people, right, and characters and all that. I mean, I've loved teaching them, and I've loved interpreting them with students. I don't know if I have that creativity part in me to, really come up with, a story. But my sister used to write a lot when she was younger, and that kind of led into her going into journalism and marketing. So in my family, I would say if somebody were to write a novel or short story, it would probably be my sister.
Okay. Now, we writers are always looking for extra time. Time is a
Yeah.
universal that we would love to have more of. And when you're doing the work that you do every day, do you find that it reduces the time that you'd like to spend writing, or do you feel that right now there's a really good balance between the time that you spend writing and the time that you spend doing the other education related things?
Mhm. Well, something that I see happening for both of the places I write blogs for is there is a big slowdown now in how many other people are submitting things. So, and I know a lot of people are finishing up the school year as you are, and I finished up about 3 weeks ago. But I think for me, it's just putting something on my calendar and, saying like every 2 weeks, I'm going to write a blog spot, right? I'm going to, I don't plan out necessarily when I'm going to write about. Often it just comes to me a day or two before, depending on the time of year or something that I've experienced. It's when you're in the summer and you're not necessarily in a school, it may be a little bit harder to come up with topics, but there's always something relevant. So I think, just making sure that you're taking that time to put it together and put it out there. And for me, it's like I did for my doctorate work. It's just sitting down. For the blogs, I would say 45 minutes to an hour and writing that out, right? And just trying to get something out there, at least a draft, and revisiting it a couple days later, other than just kind of putting a couple pieces together over a period of a week. I don't want to do it that way. I just want to get something written and then revisit it for any edits, but kind of putting it on my schedule.
Let me ask you, whom or what inspires you both as a person and as a writer?
Well, as a writer, I would say my grandfather, my late grandfather who passed in late 2014, he researched genealogy. And so he wrote a book in 1985 about the Goodier family. So the 200 years in America. So, I was really impressed with just the work that he did. And that was pre-internet, and just gathering all the information through letters and visiting places and all that kind of stuff. So, that was the first published author in my family. Inspiring me as a person, I mean, there's a lot of educational leaders out there. There are a lot of people I've worked with that I would consider as mentors. There's there's just a lot of inspiring people, I think. Too many to name, I think, but it varies from like the interactions that I have with them. But I think how if somebody's transparent and honest, that inspires me. If somebody says it like it is and isn't afraid to be themselves, that inspires me as well.
Sometimes it's sad that we hide behind this facade of trying to be someone else to fit the moment. And you're absolutely right that being yourself is as critical as anything. Okay, now I know that as an entrepreneur, a podcast host, professional development provider, that it takes a lot of preparation. You can't just wing it. You can't show up 5 minutes before and start doing something. That there is a foundation that has to be laid. So how much writing do you find that you're required to do in these different roles?
Well, the professional development, I think I just run with a couple of themes, and I oftentimes just tweak the presentation depending on the audience. And, if it's in building presentation, the school, it's going to be more focused towards the school. And, I've done a couple different topics that at the school level that I haven't done at a conference. But for the conferences, I think it's just taking the few topics that I've presented in breakout sessions and then just make it relevant to that audience. So I wouldn't say that there's a ton of writing when you have a presentation, when you have like a backbone of a presentation already written. I would say at the beginning, because I've been doing this for a little over 4 years, obviously they took a lot more practice, right? Speaking in front of a group of adults, right? There's one thing speaking in front of a group of kids, but it's all different. Speaking in front of a group of adults, and I remember how nervous I was, right? And there were probably 30 people that showed up to that first session that I presented at the conference, and I had a friend that was helping me out. And I think I probably went too fast, right? It just some of those things that I look back on and tweaking those presentational skills, right? But it's I think that the most important thing is taking that risk, right? To have this material and put it out there, and always getting some feedback after the session that they really learned a lot or they really liked the presentation. And it's easier to get feedback from the sessions in person than it is from the Zoom sessions. But I did present on Saturday, and got some people that said some good things in the chat. So that always helps you feel better, about how it went when it resonates with people. And I think once you've been in education for a certain amount of years, you feel like there are things that you want to share with others, and you hope that will help the others along the way. Whether you're giving a session in the summer and they're not going to start school for another 2 months, or it's in the middle of February, but that they can take away these skills and use them in their practice.
I think that has a lot of insight in it, a lot of practicality. You're speaking from your own experience, and that's a good thing. I get the feeling that a lot of what you do comes just from that. It's from your observation, from your experience, and what you feel inside to be relevant.
Yeah, I think that, and as having posted this podcast, I see there's so many people that have experienced the same thing, or even giving these PD presentations for 3 years prior to starting the podcast. I mean, I know a lot of these teachers have experienced the same things that I have. And especially when you're giving an in-person presentation, you have that feedback like, oh yeah, that's been me, or I had that student, right? So you connect with the audience. It's like connecting with the classroom of kids, but saying those things that'll lure them in, right, and keep their attention.
Is there a way that in your writing, whether it's for a presentation, whether it's for a blog, whether it's some other way, you just know that this is profound, this is really good, I've nailed it here?
I think when I'm able to intersperse quotes or use just some sites, or a lot of time I'll say, yeah, somebody else, something I've gained from somebody else that I want to talk about. I don't want to take the credit for everything, right? But once I can kind of see a flow in that, right, and that it's something that I know people want to make sure they have notes on, and I always provide some type of a note catcher for the people that are doing my sessions, whether in person or online. But something also, I know I've said something profound when I do get like people to ask questions about that, or I give them a moment to tell me about your experience with XYZ. So I think, and then for the blogs, I think when you're able to hear back from people, they're sharing your blog post, they're other people that you don't even know of are reading it, then that I think is profound, because it's hit a greater audience.
Now, when you're writing, again, for whatever purpose, I'm going to ask you 2 parts to this question. First, what's the most rewarding part when you're taking this writing journey? And the second part is, what's your biggest challenge?
Well, as I said, I think the rewarding part is just it going out to that greater audience, right? I mean, it's one thing publishing a blog online that certain people will see because it's been promoted through the website that it's on, or through social media. It's another thing if you actually published a book and you know how many people have bought the book. So you don't always know with the blog piece, but for example, I haven't mentioned yet, but I was part of the 100 Stop project that Rick Jetter was an editor on, Rick Jetter and Rebecca Coda, and it came out on May 14th, I think. So I wrote a chapter in that book, right? And that's, you can go in and see how much it sold, and it was #1 the first couple of weeks it came out in a couple of educational categories. So, being a part of that project, I'm able to see see that it's resonating with people, and people are now using it for professional development at their school. I think the hardest part in the writing process is just making sure what you've written is, it sounds good. I think it's that, like, is this really going to go anywhere, right? Or is this something that people have heard many times, or is this something that I'm able to put my own spin on? Is this something that, and what I'm thinking is it coming clear on the paper, right? Because I'm not writing that novel. I'm not writing a fiction about other people. I'm writing from my own experience. So that's probably what I wonder a lot of the time, like if it's really like understandable to them, I guess. Like, but I think, as I said, kind of from that podcast experience, people have been through a lot of the same stuff, so they know, and they can resonate in these situations and when you're talking about these various topics.
Is there some advice, and maybe it's different for each of these categories, but is there some advice that you would give to someone who wishes to be a future author or a future podcaster, maybe even a future doctoral student?
Well, those are three different, vastly different titles. But I think for the podcaster, I think just having a plan, right? Obviously, you need the title. You can work on the graphics later. I did some like just some very simple graphics at the beginning, and then I hired somebody to do more logo-ish type graphics a couple months in once I'd gotten a base on the podcast. So I think, but if you have an idea for the podcast, you have an idea of what you're going to do. If you're going to talk with somebody else every time, and it's just going to be two people chatting, or if you're going to interview, you kind of have to have that like plan for the podcast and how often you're going to put it out, those type of things. I would suggest for somebody who wants to put out a podcast, but it's not hard. And there are a lot of sites that host podcasts for free. And if somebody wanted to be a doctorate student, I think go for it. My story is that I had started a doctorate back in 2000 after I'd finished my master's. And I'd studied to be a foreign language teacher. So I went and started a doctorate program in second language acquisition. So the learning of a second language. And I had a whole dissertation theme I was going to research because I had to have that before I even started the program. And so there was a professor that I was going to work with, but I found out that first year when I was doing coursework, she was about to retire. So she wasn't really available much. And this was a three-year program. So I started doing research the third semester of the program, and then just kind of realized it was not going to work at that university. And I ended up just exiting that program and trying to find somebody who could help with the research in Colorado, because in 2002, I ended up moving to Colorado for a teaching job. And then I just abandoned kind of that topic a couple of years later because there wasn't really anybody who could kind of follow, the research in that niche. So I had that desire. I didn't start the doctorate program in educational leadership until 2016. But during that whole time, from 02 to 16, I had that desire. Like I would dream sometimes, like it's funny. And I don't know if you feel that way too, Joe, having been in school so many years, but like sometimes I feel like I want to go back to high school, right? I want to take all these courses, like, or, even college. Like I studied for my bachelor's in Norway. So we concentrated on 2 or 3 subject areas, but I would have loved to study social anthropology or, just other subjects, because we didn't get a chance to like dive deep into some other subjects, art history and those type of things. But like I've always had that desire for lifelong learning. And I think if somebody feels like they want to pursue an advanced degree, don't do it because somebody you work with or somebody in your family thinks you should, right? Don't do it because of a job requirement, because a lot of jobs might say they need a PhD, but they they'll often accept somebody with a master's. I mean, aside from maybe a tenure track professor position, but a lot of it depends on your expertise and experience in the subject. So a lot of the time, I think it's just do what you want to do, but make sure you know kind of what's involved in you're prepared. The program I did the first quarter, because it was a quarterly system, the first class was about kind of the ins and outs of their doctorate program. It wasn't really an academic class. It was more like a practical, like here's what you need to know of what we expect for this roughly 3-year doctorate program. And then finally, if I were to talk to somebody who wanted to blog, I would say, make sure that you have, a niche that you want to talk about. Like on my blogs, I often just kind of say the experience that I'm having, like as a day-to-day educator, or something that's happening and affecting students. But make sure that, there's something that you want to put out there. I don't think you should worry too much about like how many people are going to be reading it, or how often you should put it out. But I have seen a lot of blogs by educators that kind of fall by the wayside, right? Several people I've had on the podcast, like, oh, I saw you had a blog. Oh, then they're like, oh, I haven't added to that since February of last year, right? So, try to keep it up. And then if it's not current, I would say just take it off of your main website, right? And then just kind of put it in the archives. And that's it doesn't always work for people to continue a blog after a while. But I think just as with a doctor program, if you want to do something, pursue it. Obviously, a blog is not going to cost you anything, as opposed to a doctorate is a large financial investment.
It sounds as if you're saying that if someone has a passion and recognizes the passion,
Mm-hmm.
that it will help facilitate this entire process. But
Yeah.
there are folks out there who hesitate. Do you see the hesitation as a lack of confidence, or just not knowing what to do or where to get started? Is there any advice you could give to those folks who want to, but just don't know how to?
Yeah, I think you're right that like they don't know where to get started. So, I mean, the advice, like for me, I would say lucky when I just kind of decided in October of 16, okay, well, this is going to be the next step for me. I contacted some online universities and also some state universities, but none of the state universities were starting a cohort until the next school year. So where I ended up getting the doctorate, they had a cohort that was starting next week. So that kind of just fell into place. I think you need to just have a plan that you're able to either take the financial aid or you can support some of the coursework financially yourself. As I said, don't necessarily worry about approval from others. I mean, do make sure you have support of your family for the hours that you might spend in research. And, it does get harder as you go. I would say the first year of coursework it doesn't take too much extra time. But I think a lot of people probably are trying to seek validation. And if you're an educator wanting to go into a doctorate or wanting to start a podcast or something, I don't think asking your colleague next door is necessarily going to tell you if it's the right choice or not, because it's your choice, right? If there's a passion, if it's something you want to do, they're not necessarily the person to ask. I think it's seeing how much time something's going to take you, right? Or it's seeing how much of a financial investment something is. But do it for yourself, I think, and do it for the greater community of educators, and what kind of voice that you want to get out there, if it's a writing blog or a podcast type of medium.
I know the things that you do always reflect your heart. You speak directly from your heart, and that I think is one of the keys to your effectiveness.
Mm-hmm.
That people know that if they're chatting with you, if they're reading what you're putting out there, that it's something that you truly do believe in. And I think sometimes we need to put a little distance between ourselves and that which we're producing, because when we're so close to it, it's tough to be critical.
Yeah.
We tend to see it with a different set of eyes. Was there someone maybe who was your mentor, the person who encouraged you, that possibly changed things around for you?
In terms of the podcast or
any of the writing that you've done so far?
I mean, it's been so different. Like, as I said, the doctoral writing, there was a university assigned mentor, but she was basically guiding students along the way. And I wouldn't say I had a close relationship with her. It was more just like, you have to work with this person to get the thing completed. But like, I would say just being a part of the mastermind, I'm with the Better Leaders, Better Schools Mastermind, and also the Teach Better Team Mastermind, being a part of a community like that. And there's usually, I mean, anywhere from like 5 people to like 13 people on these Zoom calls that are once a week. And just because on these mastermind calls, you have people who, a lot of the time, them pretty well, like the Better Leaders, Better Schools I've been working with for like 2 years. So you have that safe space, right, to ask, like, I'm thinking of doing XYZ. What do you guys think, right? or, I want to redesign like the logo for my podcast, or, I'm developing this professional development session. Can you help me with ideas on how to ask questions, or, develop this worksheet for participants? So I think having a group of colleagues that you can bounce ideas off of is definitely a great way to get that support. And I'm talking about the masterminds in terms of like, they're not so close to you in the fact that they're not working in the same building. So if you had like an issue, maybe with a boss, or, just something with your school district, they're there also to like, hear if there is a difficult time that you're going through, right? And how can you approach something differently at the day-to-day work? But they're not going to be judgmental of you in the fact that they're only seeing you once a week, and they know you in this space only. So I wouldn't say there's a, one particular mentor, but I think just the Zoom room of colleagues, the communication with people, that they're all in that space to hear from others and to learn from others and to lay out any grievances or ideas or concerns, is a super idea for any educator at any level. I mean, for new teachers up to superintendents, I think everybody should participate in something like this.
Let me ask you, if you weren't writing your blog, if you weren't podcasting, if you weren't an entrepreneur, is there something that you wish to be doing instead, or you might consider doing instead, something that might be called a dream profession?
Well, behind me on the background is a European castle, and when I was in college, I did tour guiding, and I continued doing that. I would say about 7 years after I graduated, I went back to that city during the summers and would do that most summers because I speak multiple languages. And I love to greet tourists and, guide them through like the museums and the cathedrals in the city in different languages. And that got me used to being in front of a group as well. Like I talked about like doing professional development in front of adults. I think that's different than guiding tourists, but the guiding tourist thing I haven't done for about 16 years now, but it was really a passion of mine back in college and things. So I think I would probably want to do something with tourism full time if I wasn't in education, and maybe that would be a retirement gig, right?
Okay.
Leading there were cruise ships that would come, and I talked to some of the people that worked on the cruise ships, and I think that was a little hard of a lifestyle because you're on a cruise ship for 9 months and you're off for a couple months. But so I don't think I would really want to do that. But I think just leading groups, in excursions and having them see new things, and me being able to use my multiple languages, that would be my other dream job.
Now, I know that your podcast is a wonderful production, and having been a part of that, having been a guest on your show, I know that as a host, you are one of the finest because you listen, you hear what the guest says, and then you continue that line of questioning, not necessarily for what your vision is, but you try to take the podcast in the direction of the vision that your guest has. I think that's admirable. And I encourage as many folks as possible to be a part of that podcast. So since we're saying this, I know there are people there who are thinking, okay, gee, I would like to be a part of that. Maybe I could be a guest on Dana's podcast. How might they reach out to you?
So I'm on Twitter and Instagram. So my Twitter handles are at Dana Goodier. I think you mentioned in the intro. And they can contact me also through the podcast handles, both on Twitter and Instagram at Out of Trenches PC. I also have a website, danagoodier.com. You could just send me a direct message through social media, I think is the easiest way, or you could connect with me on LinkedIn. And I always do a pre-chat with my guest to kind of plan out the episode and talk about where they'd like to go with the episode. There's some people I've had on that I already know personally, but even if I knew them, right, I still want to kind of plan the episode out, right? So I thank you so much for your kind words. I know just from being an educator and administrator, like that part listening, especially when we're talking about stakeholders and parents, that listening part is so important. And, listening to parents that are, irate or just really up in arms about something, just kind of bringing that down and just listening, I think is those skills have transferred over to being a podcast guest. And it just wanting to hear these people's stories, right? And asking them follow-up questions. And people always have so much to share. And there's vast, like I talked to somebody who's opening up a charter school in northern Idaho next year, and it's just their stories are just so different. Like, I mean, I'm not always talking to somebody who's doing, something similar to me, right? It's really interesting hearing about these other educators and what they're doing and how they're contributing.
Once again, to reach out to Dana, the spelling is DANAGOODIER. I would encourage folks to reach out to you. I think that, as I say, you're one of the folks who does listen and who does bring out the best in your guests, mostly because you listen with your heart as well as with your brain. And so many folks today are so into, I've got to say this, I've got to do that. Here's a deadline, here's a timeline. And it's nice to meet someone who says, let's have a chat. Let's talk like two friends. And I would guess that when most folks finish chatting with you, that they feel a kinship, that they feel that they've made a friend. I know I did when I chatted with you. I talked about the experience to some colleagues and I said, boy, if you get the opportunity to do this, go for it, because Dana really does listen. And she's a good person, good heart.
Yeah, and I feel the same as well, Joe. And I've had that experience with many of my guests. Like, I'm glad I make that connection. And, I'm going to do a 100 episode anniversary. It'll probably be in another month or so. So, I'd love to have you back on, and I'll probably have like 4 or 5 people on we'll decide on a topic. But I did that for my 50th episode back in February. So, I really like inviting people back and just talking about kind of what's been going on in your role and how you've learned, especially from this past year.
It would be an honor. And yeah, you're right. Going through this pandemic right now, I've not met one educator who said, gee, I remember this happening so many years ago, or I've been through something very similar. There is nothing even close to this. As you know, I'm getting ready to start my 48th year in November, and all in the classroom. I don't know of anything that has ever come down this way. And I want to take this opportunity, I'm sure you join me, to salute every educator, whether in the classroom, in central office, support staff, everyone involved, parents, students, community, for coming together and making the educational experience as worthwhile as possible under the most daunting circumstances I hope we never have to see again.
No, I definitely agree with you and salute all the efforts that people have made. And I think we've all become better. I mean, there are some people who have decided to go in a different direction or leave their building and maybe apply to different school. There are a lot of job openings now in different roles. But, I think it's, how do educators realize kind of what they want professionally as well, right? That there are certain things that they'll do, and there's certain things that they might just get too burned out on. And, I know a lot of people have heard about the importance of self-care, but really just making sure that you're taking this experience and, bringing in some of the tools and innovations that you've used this past year to, make things different and better for the post-pandemic era.
I'm going to end on that note because I don't know how we can top that. Dana Goodier, thank you so much for taking an author's journey with me today. Your kindness is greatly appreciated.
Well, thank you so much, Joe, for having me on.
Well, that concludes our journey for this day. Tune in again for more conversations with more authors of interest. For an author's journey, I'm your host, Joe Pizzo. Have a wonderful day.